our panelists for the afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, first up, he's a decorated public officer with over 36 years of service, including being a teacher, principal, chief education officer, supervisor of elections, and now he's the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education in Grenada. Please welcome P.S. Elvis Maureen. Alongside him, a Caribbean educator and a global thought leader, a chartered manager, industrial engineer with postgraduate training and certification in financial services management, strategic direction, and leadership, and executive education. He is the former chairman of the Caribbean Association of National Training Authorities and currently the registrar and chief executive officer of the Caribbean Examinations Council. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wayne Wesley. Alongside the two distinguished gentlemen, another career educator, a promoter of lifelong learning, a former teacher, head of department, deputy principal, principal, and now education officer within the Department of Education in Anguilla, with responsibility for human resource management and professional development. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Rita Celestine Carty. The Anguillan contingent is here. I'm making a motion that our next C.A.P.S.S conference is in Anguilla. Seconded. Alongside Mrs. Rita Celestine Carty, ladies and gentlemen, an accomplished higher education professional with extensive experience in teaching, quality assurance, and educational leadership. She's a former chair of the Department of Arts, Humanities, and General Studies at the T.M. Show Community College, the co-director of the Confucius Classroom, and now she's currently serving our region as chief examiner at CXC and serving Grenada as the CEO of the National Training Agency. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kemoy Edwards. So we have a distinguished panel, and we're looking to unpack how you and I, as career educators, as education administrators, as regional bodies, how are we going to build a sustainable future for education in the Caribbean? So, ladies and gentlemen, as far as I know at least, the wisest man that ever lived said that without vision, the people perish. So I want to task our entire panel. You have varied perspectives given the roles that you hold. I'm going to start with CXC. What? There's a reason why. What is the vision for the future of Caribbean education? Dr. Wesley.
Mic check. There we go. There we go. Yeah, talk about surprises. The topic under which we have, by the way, thank you very much for inviting me, and certainly it's a pleasure for me being here to share in this very important discussion with principals and leaders across the region and other stakeholders. The principle behind sustainability is one of an ecosystem that can take care of itself. And to create that ecosystem requires every element, every component to be included in that sustainability program. I listened to the opening speech this morning, invited guest speaker, and while I agree, and this is where we become very provocative for the sake of getting the best out of us, all right? While I agree with a lot of what is being said, there's one aspect of the presentation that I would perhaps want us to consider differently. And the reason why I'm saying that, if we're going to be creating a sustainable system, I broke it down into 3 transformational elements: that of governance, that of policy, and that of organization. At the level of governance, we are talking about leadership, direction, and finance. And I put finance there because at the level of governance, so which our politicians and our ministries and all those persons sit, it is important that as they see education as a critical component of human resource or human capital development of the region, it's an important economic pillar. And we must facilitate that with the proper direction as well as the supporting finance. Last year, we were in Cayman Islands at a summit conducted by the CDB, and the premier of that country spoke to the fact of us having a collaborative approach with the Ministry of Finance, Education, and the Ministry of Finance, because we can talk all we want. If you don't have the resources to effect the requisite changes for us to be sustainable, we are going to have a challenge. Another part of governance that is crucial is that of stakeholder involvement, inclusive decision making, a collaborative approach, not a combative one, because in an era where you have egos to treat with, in an era where you have a social society to deal with, in an era where you have several other competing factors, it's going to be important that whatever environment we create is a collaborative one and an inclusive one. Principals, teachers, ministries of education, students, private sector. It is the ecosystem, and none of us should seek to blame any particular component, because together we create what now exists. And we have to change that. The other component of that transformational element is that of organization. We are talking about structure. We are talking about the learning environment and the delivery environment. We are talking about management for sustainable resilience. What do we create? How do we ensure that the requisite structure provides the agility required, provide the flexibility required, and provide the kind of institutional capability with respect to human resources, teachers, and the supporting resources that we need to ensure that the system is sustainable. And the third element I'll close with is that of policy. You know, the Education Act for some countries, since it has been established since the post-colonial days, still exists. That has to change if we are talking about going into a future. Standards must now be developed. The regulatory environment, because we are now operating in a new era of digital and personal privacy for data, but yet still being driven by a technological advancement that is causing us to think differently about how we treat with content and how we treat with data. And then finally, we have to think about the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, the AI systems that are coming on, and how are we going to make sure that our system of education, the ecosystem, collectively get the direction, the finance, the structure, the environment, the management, the Education Act, the infrastructure, and the standards for us to survive collectively. I put it to you that for some of the Education Act that we are trying to build on needs to be decolonized to get us into a state where we are beginning to chart the course of our own Caribbean destiny, developing a duty of care that sees every learner that is entrusted in our care is given the opportunity to fully realize their potential. Thank you, sir.
So I actually want our both the education officials in the room to respond to what Dr. Wesley just proposed. But before we go to that, Dr. Wesley, how do you see CXC's role in that vision that you just pitched? You're going to need to keep it on because you're in the hot seat today.
Mic check. There we go. All right. So CXC's role, one of the things we have come to realize is that our philosophy on how training, teaching, and learning is managed and developed is to shift away from the notion of a content-laden curriculum to a competency-based curriculum. In other words, and that competency-based curriculum must offer the level of flexibility that allow a student to be able to select and do what is of interest to them. The reason why we are frustrating a lot of students now, we are forcing them in a mold that we have created.
Right.
And they don't have the flexibility to determine what is it that I want to do and the extent to which I want to do it. What we are doing with assessment these days is breaking it down into smaller micro-credential components that will allow a student who has interest in a particular discipline, but only to a particular level, can make that choice and decision. So what we are doing is creating a balance now between content and competencies. Content is ubiquitous. You can actually find that anywhere now on the internet. People can get it. What is crucial for us is for persons to be able to use that content in a constructive way. So you notice, and all of us can identify people who are very articulate and can critically think about a problem, but ask them to solve it. And you have a lot of those persons today. You will hear them commenting on public challenges and public solutions and what needs to happen. But when there is a need to solve that problem, it is lost. And so education and what we are trying to do, we have actually created what we call the skills and competency framework now to give greater emphasis to 5 thematic areas around the 21st century skills and 15 sub-skills, critical thinking skills that will allow students now, because education now we recognize should not be preparing students only for what exists now, but it should prepare them for what is likely to happen in the future. And those transversal skills that students acquire must prepare them to survive in the future. And hence we're moving to a competency-based approach where, yes, content is important, but skill, competencies would be crucial in allowing people to transition to what the future holds.
All right, well said. And I want our education officials now to respond. Dr. Wesley laid out 3, let's call them pillars: governance, policy, finance. And he also has championed the idea and the direction that CXC is going in. But he's also called us out. Our education acts are still colonial, created before there was technology, and we are now living in a technological age. From the Ministry of Finance, Education's point of view, I'm going to start with Mrs. Kati and then come to PS. How would you respond? And tell me, what is the ministry's vision for education? Does it align with CXC or no?
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. And I guess my presentation is not so much going to be a response, but my 2 cents on the whole matter of what is education.
Right.
And I think what I'm going to say is going to have to complement what Dr. Wesley has said, because I think we also have to widen this whole idea of what is education. And what I'm glad to have this opportunity to say. It's often on my mind, and I even want to stretch a little bit more of what is always on my mind, and that is that what we are building is not a student for a future or a person to enter the workforce. What we are building is a person. And we heard it a little earlier when we educate. I think it's a quote from Eric Williams that was said this morning. You're creating people to live with.
Right.
And I'm thinking that it's also you're creating people to live. We were not created to work. I don't believe. So I am going to say that the co-curricular and that extracurricular component of education, which we have now as a little frill or a bonus, should be an actual equal component to the academic aspect of school. I feel that very strongly, so what our school, thank you so much for endorsing that, what our schools offer to children away from their desks have to be seen as very, very important, because it is developing them to be, we have 5 pillars of education in 21st century. And besides learning to know, learning to learn, learning to do, it's also learning to be, learning to live together, and learning to transform yourself and your society. Right. And to me, those are the parts that I would want us to focus on. So the time away from the desk, and it complements, I'm saying this does not take away from anything that Dr. Wesley has said, but we have to add that part. And I would be the last person to coerce people into doing things, but it shouldn't be as optional and as voluntary, but we all have to come to the understanding that it is vital. Stretching my point of view, I want to say that we have to leverage our community resources, of which we all are, every single one of us, and we don't need an act to propel us. Sorry, Dr. Wesley, we don't need a policy to propel us, we just need our human nature. And I also want to say that when I say community, I don't mean our immediate local communities. We are a community here, and I have benefited so much from being part of this organization. I think we have to get to the point where we see our human resources not belonging to our local spaces, but belonging to our region as the whole, and sharing them to, that very important word in the theme, to inspire our students. Dr. Wesley was right in saying that we're preparing them for something that we don't know. But if they're inspired, they can help to create that thing that we don't know, rather than just living in it or consuming from it. And the last part that I want to add to is that part of us that we still don't understand and know, and it's because we disconnect our past from our present. Right. I think we have to really dig down and figure out who we are as this regional space and really use it to become all that we can be.
Thank you very much, and very well said. A human-centered approach to 21st century learning. P.S. Maureen.
Thank you very much. Let me first of all congratulate C.A.P.S.S on his 30th, 30th conference. Yeah. And I feel special to be among these esteemed colleagues, as part of this discourse. Now, let us look at this. And sometimes we operate in a disconnect. And sometimes we operate as though we just have to tick boxes, right? So if we go back a bit, we talk about Millennium Goals, right? SDGs, and we have those with specific to education, health, and so on. And of course, we have timelines. And we build on that. So just to put the anchor this point, let me just, in terms of Grenada, what Grenada did out of that was to develop a vision 2035. And it says a people-centered transformation. By virtue of this, it is very clear that once we use the word transformation, it means, therefore, it's not business as usual. So we have to find ways as to how we respond. In other words, we need to be more purposeful in the kind of education system that we want to govern as we go forward. Let me just plug this here. When my CEO spoke a while ago, my CEO, and I'll tell you why I say that. Many a times we disconnect CXC from other systems, but we are part of CXC. Yeah? Some of us sit on the board of governors. So what Dr. Wesley has spoken is not new or not something far-fetched, but we all contribute to to the collective wisdom of this. CX is ours, and it's us to keep. So how do we leverage all of this, and what do we do? And I was very happy when I heard my colleague about the human center, but also look at us as a region. We have to begin to look at us as a region, forging together as to how best we can leverage all the opportunities that are there. So whether it is through CXC, UE, UG, and all the others, or whether for those of us in the OECS, we talk about the OECS sector strategy. All of these things, we must come together to advance our cause as a people. We talk about the ideal citizen, right? What are the components, and how do we help our system to grow to do this? Now, for this to happen, we must be on a clear path, and it must be sustainable. So I agree with Dr. Wesley talking about financing. How do we finance what we do? Because you cannot sustain anything if you do not finance it properly. But you must have a clear vision as to where you want to go as a people. And I believe you in this room, you are pivotal to this process. Irrespective of all the challenges that we have confronting us, I think we have great minds that has proven in the past, and we will continue to have, that can propel a system that we are proud of, a system where we can compete with the rest of the world. We have to make that bold and forthright decision and discourse as we move forward. So I believe we are well positioned to do this. Now, we need to pay attention, and it came out this morning, to the climate side of things, the climate change and all of this. This is something that we need to look at. It would affect us as a people, so we're going to confront these realities. As in Grenada, what we've been doing now is to build our digital infrastructure, because we recognize that this is critical going forward. All of us remember just yesterday the COVID experience and what we had to do to ensure that we can function, that we can deliver services. So it means, therefore, we need to look at these things. The other major focus that Grenada, and I wouldn't say much about this because I see Dr. Edwards is here, and I think she's better able to speak to this, but we are focusing now also on skill development as to how we propel this going forward. And we are the recipient of a regional project, that is the OECS Innovation and Skills Project, along with St. Lucia and the OECS Commission, where we can help to propel our thoughts going forward. So I think we are positioned. So we're looking at the digital infrastructure as well as skill development. And I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
So, Dr. Edwards, naturally I have to allow you to come in and share your vision, especially from the standpoint that you're CEO of the National Training Agency. And I think in many ways you are most on the ground. You're dealing, perhaps you get to see the skills gap that we often talk about. You get to see it in real time. You get to hear the plights of employers. In terms of a sustainable system and the future of education in Grenada and the rest of the region, what does that look like for you?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So in terms of our vision for what a sustainable education system in the Caribbean can look like, to me it starts with the whole idea of decolonizing our education system. And I'm happy that Dr. Wesley spoke about CXC's approach to modularized examinations. Because what we find happening is a disconnect between our education system and what is really needed by the labor market, as well as how our students function. So we have education systems that are still very traditional, content-based, focusing a lot on content, some of which may not have been created by us in the Caribbean. Right. So we have to look at our textbooks. We have to look about our approaches, the ways in which we teach the students. And in particular, we have to look at our assessments that are heavily content-based And we need to move to assessments that will include, for example, universal design for learning, competency-based approaches, etc. So we do commend CXC for that approach towards the decolonization of education. Dr. Wesley also spoke about policy. And while I do not discredit the human approach, because the human approach is very important, we need to have a balance between the public good of education, in other words, creating citizens who can think and reason critically and learn to be be humanistic in approaches. But we also need to look at the other side of education, which from a skills perspective is employability. When we go to school, we're not just going to school to learn to be, but we also want to get a job to be able to pay for school, to be able to contribute to society to solve problems. So we need to look at our policies within the Caribbean region. Are our policies integrating skills-based learning? Are our workplaces recognizing skills-based learning? So we have the Caribbean Qualifications Credit Framework. And the hope is that all Caribbean governments will move towards having a credit framework that will take into consideration skills-based learning, so that when there are job advertisements, apart from the heavy content-based bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, we are also seeing that the equivalent certifications can be accepted within the workplace, whether it's Caribbean vocational qualifications, national vocational qualifications, etc. So that's on the policy side. It's also important to look at the labor side, and for us to have a sustainable education system, we have to address the labor market shortage. When our students graduate from secondary school and enter into any post-secondary institution, the whole idea is that they can be able to sustain themselves and their families in future. And the labor market surveys for the Caribbean, and maybe I should speak in particular to Grenada, right, is showing that there is a skills mismatch. Right. So that the labor market is calling for certain skills, whether it's skills for now or skills for the future. And I say future cautiously because it can be a bit challenging to predict accurately what is to come. But the labor market is showing that there is a skills mismatch. And fortunately for us within the Caribbean region, different governments are commissioning skills surveys and skills audits. There is, I believe it's the Canadian Global Affairs Canada recently launched that call for proposals for Grenada, Belize, Dominica, etc., to be able to do those surveys. It's important because what the labor market surveys reveal is that we have a cadre of persons trained in certain areas, but when it comes to filling the gaps, we do not have, for example, in Grenada, we may not have sufficient, whether it's carpenters or sufficient sous chef, or those who can work in other areas of the hotel industry, the service industry, etc. And it means that if we are to create a sustainable education system, we ought to use our finances wisely. I'm not saying we're not, but we ought to ensure that there is this alignment, and thus we would need to have more conversation with labor, with the employers, to find out what are the skills needed, what are the gaps, and added to that, to have a system that is agile and efficient to quickly respond, because sometimes when we get the information, we now have to put systems in place. So in other words, the governments need a mechanism, and I'm happy that P.S. Maureen spoke about the digital aspect, because we need to ensure that the information is available in real time. If, for example, right now we are talking about free movement between the OECS, and I recently saw free movement between some of the other countries that are not part of the OECS, it means that our data must be available to show what is needed in Grenada, what is needed in Dominica, who are the people who are skilled in certain areas to be able to fill those gaps. And we also, when we talk about digital, capitalize on that aspect, because we ought to respond. We are in in terms of our climate, it's disaster prone in terms of hurricanes. We do not want another shutdown if there is a disaster. So how much are we capitalizing on the digitalization of education to ensure that we are flexible? And how much are we capitalizing on skills to ensure that we are inclusive? Because when we talk sustainability, we ought to not just talk about the environmental aspect, but also the social aspect. How inclusive are we? So we have to build systems that will include those who are learning differently those who are physically challenged, to ensure that our system is really sustainable. And not forgetting those who are already employed, because it's about building up the skills of those who are already there and recognizing that they have acquired those skills. So lifelong learning systems as well. But the finances, as Dr. Wesley points out, would be very crucial to ensure that we can maintain that balance.
Thank you very much. I'm guessing what we're seeing here is it's a tall ask. So I want us to kind of concretize this thing. Where do we start? We have a room full of education administrators, principals. We have different stakeholders in the room, and I want us to kind of zero in on those stakeholders. I want to start with you, Dr. Wesley. If you'd like to respond to any of the comments from the other panelists, feel free to do so. But also tell me, what do you need from schools, considering the direction that CXC is going? And CXC seems to be going in that direction, intent on dragging the rest of us kicking and screaming if necessary, right? So what do you need from the schools in order for us to start actually building this future?
All right, thank you very much. Just to say, I have no disagreement with any of what the panelists actually put forward. I guess in a panel discussion like this, you put a point forward and it is enhanced by others, but it's not that there is any disagreement, because fundamentally, with CXC, what we have done now is to put the learner at the center of our activity. And so we have broken that down again. I'm a man of threes, because people remember three things each time you say it. Easy to remember. So I'm a man of threes. So there are three things that we have broken down, the learner-centered approach that we want schools to also adopt. And that is learning preference and style of the learner, the learning rate at which they learn, and the learning depth, how much information and content they can take at any one time. What we have recognized is that within the school system, most persons follow our syllabuses. And our syllabuses run for 2 years, right? And those 2 years, you have to gift a child who can do that in 1 year. And they proceed to do it. But then you have the typical child who will take what? The 2 years for that program. And then you have the individualized approach that we need to have, where there's a lot more flexibility to accommodate that child. You know why? There are three things happening, and again, I like trees, right? There are three things happening across the region. A lot of learners leave in school without any certification. That's a fact. From our mathematics and syllabus results that we gave last year, for English, only 60% of those writing English, right, get 5 subjects, or, well, excluding English and mathematics, any 5 is 60%. Getting mathematics and English included, it drops to 40%. You have just lost an entire set of individuals, about 10, 20,000 individuals, who will not be able to matriculate, and in some cases will not be able to gain employment because they don't have what? Maths and English. It means then that we have to find a way that caters to the learner. And so our learner-centered approach is that of learning preferences and style, learning rate, and learning depth. Creating now a system that recognizes however competencies are achieved, it must be valued and appreciated. It doesn't necessarily have to be a written sit-down examination. We are saying students can demonstrate competencies in other ways, and our philosophy has changed to reflect that. And you're going to see when we come out, particularly with our SBAs and other things, that prior learning assessment, as we do in competency-based education, prior learning assessment, learning through contextual situations, how do we make that assessment? How do we begin to appreciate the behavioral component of a student? Time management, teamwork, collaboration. How do we assess those? Traditional assessment methods can't be used. I've met with the Human Resource Management Association across the region, and what we are trying to do is to come up with ways now to assess the behavioral competencies of students. Because why? When employers talk to us, oh, students come out with 20 grade 1s and 15 grade 1s, but they can't work in the workplace. They don't have the attitude. right? Because we are not spending time on that social behavioral aspect of the student. We are spending time on getting them to write and pass an examination, and that is not enough for them to assimilate well in the environment. And so, thank you. And so we are looking at impacting that side of an individual now. And that is why I said earlier that how we change what happens in the classroom, how we build flexibility in the learning environment, that a student who is bright can move, a student who is typical can go through the program, and a student who needs individualized and expanded approach, and I'll talk about a lot more about this tomorrow, so I won't give away much today, will be able to build their own profile. This time around, learning must be learner-centered, driven by them, because listen to me, regardless of what we do in school, if they're not interested, they're not interested. They're going to move to what is interesting to them. And that's why you have more people leaving the school system even before time. Some dropping out. Of course, the elite. And the other thing that we have to confront, we have to confront the challenge of elitism with the parity of esteem. Each and every one of us learn differently, and that difference should not relegate us to a particular sector in society. We should provide for them to self-actualize and those skills recognized.
Mrs. Carty, I see you. I know you have a response to this one.
Yes, it's not a response because as we are up here collaborated, by the way, do you see us? And I was counting the number of times that I heard that word this morning. I said I will count to see how many times collaborate and teamwork comes up in the context of this conference before we get to this stage, and I think I got to 7. So I thank you, Dr. Wesley, for reinforcing what I was saying, that part at your desk has to be complemented in equal part. You use parity of esteem, because regardless of the academic, different children will follow different academic paths, but that co-curricular that I'm talking about, that's for everybody in equal measure. Everybody will learn to be who they are supposed to be, and we are not meant to be the same person. We are not clones of one another. And in responding to Dr. Edwards with the skills gap, employers are also saying, as Dr. Wesley said, that those soft skills, that social emotional learning that you would get in that co-curriculum that has equal esteem, is important for them to work and enhance the productivity on the workforce. And I know, too, that CXC is doing that. That's why we have group SBAs. That's why we have time in CCSLC for teamwork and group dynamics, and for the students to be aware of it and to grade one another on it. But I don't think that we should be doing things for a grade. We should be doing things because it's what we're supposed to be doing, building up one another.
Before I let you go, because Dr. Edwards definitely is going to respond to this one, where do the schools start? Because we're on stakeholder number 1, which is the schools. So there has been an endorsement of this human-centered approach. What can principals do from September 1st to help build that into their current school system?
Schools are already doing it, but I think we still need to see it differently and to focus on it and prioritize it. Schools already have co-curricular and extracurricular activities, but as I said earlier, the voluntary optional basis could be, I guess, over time replaced by that value of this is something that I have to do to build myself. And I'm not talking about us as leaders imposing it on students, because students are partners in their own education. And what they understand is how they will respond. As Dr. Wesley said, they will leave what they're finding that we're doing that's not interesting to them. They'll just block us out and go and do something else. They already exercise that choice. But now, I guess what schools can do is help them to understand and make informed choices for themselves. Because we talk about lifelong learners, but I'm also very much interested in independent learners. Schools facilitate our learning. Schools don't dictate our learning. Even though they seem to be doing that, that's not what they're really doing, because our children are really showing what they prefer to do, whether or not we understand and accept their learning preference. They are doing it. So I think it's our whole mindset as leaders to make that space and to promote that extra program. and also, like I said earlier, to leverage the community for the sake of inspiration.
Right.
You know, and that inspiration is wide. It could be whatever that child wants to be, we find those resources. And again, for that child to understand that they're not only a child of the future, they're a child that's coming from somewhere. As I like to say, I want to give children roots as well as wings. So they need to understand who they are as well. To me, that creates the whole person that any employer, after they are made, can find to be an asset
Right.
in their company or enterprise, but that person also exists outside of this member of a labor force.
Excellent. I'm a full disclosure. I'm a math teacher, so I like concrete things. So, would you be for or against principals scheduling these activities within the school day? Most extracurricular activities take place after school, so it still falls secondary to the academic pursuits. So, would you be for, let's put it inside of the school day, or?
We actually, in Anguilla, had a change of school day when we got off the shift system afforded us by
COVID.
the hurricane from 2017 to 2023. Okay. So now we have a time that is still supposed to be school time from 2:30 to 3:40, where such things take place, and they're supposed to be established, grow, and expand. So it's, you know, everything is not for everybody every day. But you know that that space exists and you can grow in it, and we want people to, you know, gravitate towards finding what they would like and having the offerings available.
Okay, something to work with. Dr. Edwards?
I also want to say that I took away, even when we were on shift system, a few things from C.A.P.S.S. We had like Water Wednesdays because our health is important, and we are not, we are not, to me, I don't know, focusing enough on that. Not only our mental health, that's a buzzword right now, but just our physical health, what we consume, how we consume it. And well, we had it going for a little while, but again, that sustainability feature we have to think about, and also Fruitful Fridays. You know, so to me, that isn't time that you have to take away. That's just ideas you have to put into the atmosphere and keep promoting, remembering that these who are students now are going to be parents later. Right. So we are focusing on building people for the future, for the next 50 years. I was thinking that we are sitting here in this room because of an idea somebody had more than 30 conferences ago. Right. You know, so we have to think, we have to realize that we are who we are based on hundreds of previous years, and we have to do what we have to do now in order to influence the next few hundreds of years. So even though it mightn't be something you do on September 1st, it's different ideas, different values, different perspectives that you put into the atmosphere, and then if they are sustained by you, they can grow into something in the future beyond perhaps what we're imagining today. But they need to exist, and they need to be valued.
Well said. Dr. Edwards?
Thank you. Right. One of those concepts we may need to promote is the destigmatization of technical and vocational education and training. Some people call it career and technical education, to move away from the whole concept of TVET. But the whole thing is, it's really TVET. When we think of TVET, we tend to think traditionally about using our hands. And we do know in our society, we may have a little bit of challenge with accepting that we are doing work with using our hands. I don't know if it may be because of the colonial legacies and the whole idea of manual labor and working in the fields. And so we did have over the years that move away from agriculture. We recognize that this is an area we would want to move back to, because there are so many careers in agriculture and it's changing that we need to move away from that perception of TVET as being less than and not good enough to recognizing that it's complementary. When I go in rooms, I feel very proud when I reflect on my parents. My mother was a janitor. My father was a farmer. And not one day was I embarrassed for anything that they did, because I believe that there is dignity in every career. So when we think of the schools and the different stakeholders and what must be done, we ought to move away from our perception of what we think TVET really is, because there are so many skills. For example, in collaboration with UNESCO, the NTA has published a career guidance book with 8 different sectors and over 100 careers in TVET. And when you open this book and you begin to read and recognize that in agriculture, you can find so many different careers. And when you look at the biotechnology component of agriculture, and you look at the farming practices and the climate smart initiatives, right? As well as in education, even early childhood education is a skill. It is a skill, and within the standards that we publish, because we have over 250 standards, we recognize the business component. Marketing also falls under skills. Right. So we need to relook when we say skills, what we mean, and think about our education system, our schools collaborating with the parents in terms of career guidance. The schools do a wonderful job, but sometimes I think the parents as well need to know that every child does not have to be a lawyer. We have to move away from telling the children what we want them to be based on what we believe society will accept, and reflect on the story of the talents. If there are different talents and one is talented to do A, another is talented to do B, we ought to explore that maximization of the talents of our children. So I think the destigmatization and career guidance would be very, very important in integrating, having a system where skills and the traditional academic areas are integrated but not separated and so forth.
I expected that one to get a round of applause for sure. And you brought in our next stakeholder, perhaps the biggest in the room, which was our parents. So I'll allow P.S. Maureen to respond, and then we'll talk parents. I think we have just about 10 or so minutes left, and we'll have a chat as to what parents need to do, or at least what we need to help parents do to help build this future. P.S. Maureen.
All right, thank you very much. Now, education reform is something that we have been speaking of for quite a while. And I want to caution that reform takes time. And you have to stick to it. You have to be consistent. You've got to sustain it. What I observe is that in the region, we are not short. And even some good practice in terms of experiences. And there's nothing new, really. If you encounter a problem now, there's someone in the region who have pursued it. And in my thing, I believe we need to leverage that some more, right, in terms of looking, and the other thing is that, to put frankly, we are not short on good conversations. As a matter of fact, we talk too much. That is why we're not getting anywhere. So we have never been short on good conversations. I mean, these wonderful people are going to speak for the next couple of days. The question is, what happens thereafter? Yeah. And I think we need to move beyond just the conversation, and maybe even the excuses of not having finances, and find ways as to how we're going to incrementally implement things that are going to help us. And the question I always find strange when we meet and we talk, and I've said it last week as well, even around the TVET and the pathways, how many of us really believe this? We're only saying this. Because if you ask, the simple benchmark on the measure is, would your children go there? And see how many hands are going up. So we have to begin to believe in this. We can just speak it. We have to believe in this, and we have to see it as good for our children, good for your neighbor, good for everybody else. Because the stigma, we propel this more than anything else. We propel this more than anything else. So I think what we need to do is to begin to take that radical approach as how we're going to change, right? And as I said, we're not short on conversation, changing for a better education system.
So don't turn off the mic just yet. If we're short on conversation, you're going to have to propose some action. Where do we start, other than shutting up?
Well, I think the wonderful thing is to start incrementally, right? To start incrementally. And allow the leverage for people to innovate and be creative. Because we still believe the mold, we have a mold where every institution aspires to be that. So how do we innovate in terms of within our institution?
Right.
Exploring other things, looking maybe at a a trademark, a signature, something that you want to do. To me, that is where you need to go. Now, we need to change from within to go out. Because I often say that we can't influence our principal if we not influence ourselves, our parents, sorry, if we not influence ourselves. Mm-hmm. So we have to begin to have the change from within and then take it outside. I think that's where we're going to begin to address this. And let's not make money be a factor, but let us find ways where we could celebrate small successes and sell it and go forward. So I think we need to look first maybe at the micro level,
Right.
and move up. Convince, because it's simple, and I always tell people that policy will be policy. But most of the time, policies are broad things that we could find ways innovatively to have our own aspiration and goals be articulated. And I think that is where we need to take it from where I see.
So don't put a mic down yet, sir. Not at all. You are within the Ministry of Education. Dr. Wesley mentioned earlier that the Education Act needs revisiting across the Caribbean. You now speak of innovation and at that micro level, at the very level of the schools, finding ways to do this thing practically. Does the education system, the act, the requirements as it is now, allow for principals to be that innovative, to try these new things in order to build this new future? I want to put this to you. I want Mrs. Carty to answer, and then we're going to get back to Mr. Wesley on what CXC is doing.
So, yes and no. Because if we're going to use, I think in our case, I want to use our case as an example.
Yeah.
Right now, our Education Act is void of regulations. I think that is where the problem is. Law would be law. But if you have the right regulation as to how to implement this and the leverage you're going to give, I think it's going to be. I mean, yes, and as a matter of fact, as we speak, it started about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Our Education Act is under serious review. So we should have a final document coming out, shortly. But I think over the years, when we move from the 1976 Act, I think, into the 2002, that's when the last major review took place. What happened is that somehow the regulation side of it disappeared. So we need to get that there because this is what will guide and give you the teeth ready to move forward.
Okay. Mrs. Carty, is the education system?
Well, I think we in Angola also operate under an act that is devoid of regulations. And I think that goes to my point as well. People don't wait for regulations to act, right? They are acting all the time. And you were saying that we have to talk about parents, and Dr. Edwards was talking also about the stigma. And I want to go back to the stigma comes from somewhere, and you were hinting at it. It comes from our past. But if we understand that that's where it comes from, then we can debunk ourselves on it and make ourselves understand that we are no longer in a post-emancipation period. We are in almost the second half of the 21st century, and we need what we need, and we have to get what we need, and we have to get it for ourselves. So I think, again, that delving in the past, and then also, it just occurred to me that this learning isn't only for our students, it's for all of us.
Right.
And we talk about lifelong learning, and P.S. also said, we have to start with ourselves. So this is an education, not just for the students of the institutions that we lead. This is an education for all of us, to understand our past, to understand where our stigmas come from, to understand what we need to move forward. And then when we get it, I think it might be easier for parents to get it because then, again, it's in the atmosphere. And again, reinforcing that it's not going to be a wave of a wand or a click of a finger, but we have to get to a new type of thinking. And I guess that's where the transformation comes in what we are trying to do this week and always. And I think an important analogy that I sometimes use to people when we think like this can help us. If all of us were surgeons, when the surgery is over, what are we going to eat if there are no cooks? And how successful can any surgery be if it's not in a clean operating room? And who is going to do that? And that helps us to understand that all work is important.
Very well said, Dr. Wesley. CXC, in many ways, drives the change within the region. I think every principal wants to feel successful, and that stems from every teacher wanting to feel successful. And oftentimes, in order to feel successful, the number of CXC passes is the goal. Parents also want to feel successful as well, and they feel successful when their students, their children, pass a certain number of CXCs. How does that reality fit in to the vision that CXC is trying to drive in the region?
All right, very, very good question there. And I will start first from the perspective of the parents. I think one of the areas that, as a examining body, we have not been very engaging with that particular group of stakeholders, and we are now making a significant effort in engaging them. In fact, when I talk about governance and I talk about stakeholder engagement and inclusive decision making, CXC's actual action in that regard is now working, ourselves and the Caribbean Development Bank is now working with the Parent Teachers Association across the region to create a regional parent teachers body to incorporate them in CXC's governance structure. So they themselves begin to become a part of that inclusive decision-making framework, because we recognize that's a group, and we have been engaging them since March to ensure that they become a part of the collective wisdom that guides the evolution. As I talked earlier, the ecosystem is not just one, the Ministry of Education or government, it's also the parents, right, and the teachers and all that is involved. When I talk about inclusive decision-making, when they're at the table participating and collaborating on that decision, it's much more easy to digest and understand where we're going, because we now have collective responsibility. When I spoke earlier about leadership and direction and finance, and the point I made about this morning and the speaker and what happens, the scripture tells us that a soft answer, what it does?
Turns away wrath.
But grievous words. The book on influence tells us if you want somebody's behavior to change, you speak to them in a way that will compel them to respond. None of us like somebody confronting you about a deficiency in a way that allows your ego to be lost. I'm saying this to say that as we engage the ministries, as we engage the government, as we engage teachers, as we engage principals, as we engage students, as we engage parents, let us come with an understanding that we have a common purpose to advance education, right? All of us, and what I've come to realize sitting in this seat as CEO for CXC and having to deal with all member states, each and every one of them having a different perspective and different stakeholders to treat with, they have a ball to juggle, right? And so if it is that I want you to do something, I talk to you in a way that brings on empathy. And so consultation over confrontation. We can collaborate without acrimony, because if we have acrimony in the midst, any at all, one partner will not cooperate. We don't cooperate, and all of us inside here are like that. We don't cooperate on antagonism. We cooperate when somebody has mutual respect for you and for what you're saying, and allow for the truth and the facts to come out and inform where we're going. So I want us to take that approach where we begin to have amicable dialogue. Speaking the truth, we're not saying, because parity of esteem is important, employment is important, but the money has to come from somewhere. And yes, money is not all PS, because one of the things I say to them at CXC, and my staff always look at me and say, sir, what you're doing, we need money. Because I said it's not always about more resources. It is being resourceful with what you have. And sometimes that balance will create a little tension because we have to work within our space. So what I'm saying to us this morning, we collectively understand the pressures that the education system now faces. And though that pressure can only be solved when every component of the ecosystem get together in an amicable way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a lovely way for us to put a bow on this morning's discussion. I want to give each of our panelists 30 seconds, parting words. What's one key thing that you want each of our listeners here to take away as we wrap up? I'll start with Dr. Edwards, and we'll make our way across.
Right, so to summarize, I just want to emphasize that the promotion of a sustainable education system requires the inclusion and the participation of all. So a participatory approach would be essential. We have heard the different perspectives about the schools and the ministries of education working together, and now including the perspective of having the parents, more of the parents, involved in that conversation. But we also want to continue to involve more the employers and the labor, those who are involved in the labor market, because that's going to definitely inform what we train our children in and how we train them. Thank you.
Excellent.
And to add to that, I just simply want to say that an education system, a regional education system that is undergirded by emotional literacy has no choice but to be successful and sustainable.
Thank you.
Everything I've said before. But just to say that the quality of the education system, we talk about the universal access, and we talk about universal quality. I want us now to begin to emphasize the human component, which is the universal duty of care, where we present every child with the opportunity to achieve their full potential.
My bit is this. C.A.P.S.S is very powerful. You're well poised to change the landscape after all these years. So I would say to you, be a strong advocate for change in terms of education, and we can see a bright future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to all of our panelists. Thank you very much for a rich and insightful discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end. I turn you over to our moderator for the rest of the day.
Ladies and gentlemen, the panel and the hosts for this afternoon's session, let's put our hands together once again. I want to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Elvis Morin, Permanent Secretary, Dr. Wesley, Dr. Edwards, and Ms. Cathy for assisting with this session. We take your advice, and we are certainly going to return to our institutions and implement in one way or the other. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. John, for assisting and moderating this session. Colleagues, we all have access to the conference platform. At this time, I invite you to head on to the homepage and scroll down to the sessions feedback. We have three feedback to give at this time. One for the opening session, the first presentation by Macmillan, and then feedback on this panel discussion. Kindly do so at this point. If you do not have access to the conference platform, please check our RCS team, the RSC team to assist you. Additionally, Macmillan have a gift package for the 2 individuals who assisted with the icebreaker this morning. Please check the Macmillan table at the back for your gift. And the RSC team is showing us innovative way in which we can do our assessment at the class level at the end of a session, so we can go back and implement with the members of our staff. And they're going to give me an indicator when they are satisfied with the level of response, and then you can even continue during the break, the lunch break. All right, thank you very much, colleagues. We can continue doing so during the lunch break and while we have our discussions during that time. At this time, I want to invite Sister Delia, the principal of the St. Rose Modern Secondary School here in Grenada, to do our grace before meals and lead us in a short prayer before we take lunch. It's now 1:30. The next session would have started at 2:15. So we will tell you, we'll give you an indicator for when to return to the hall and the various areas for the afternoon session. Sister Delia, please stand so we can pray.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Good and gracious God, we thank you for the gift of life and for the ability to eat. We thank you for all those who have prepared the meal we are about to eat, both directly and indirectly. Bless their every effort, bless their creativity and passion. As we eat today, we ask that you help us to remember those who do not have and help our hearts to grow with greater generosity so that we can provide for their needs. Bless this meal, bless us, and give us the energy and the nourishment we need to continue your most holy will as educators. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you very much. We can now have lunch at the annex.